And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Pull up a chair and join us today. If you're new here, welcome. This is the Food Safety Chat Live. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every day at this time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, where I am, 10 a.m. Eastern, or wherever you are in the world, we have a 1-hour discussion around a topic that's food safety based. And I have the awesome privilege to bring on experts in this, and we'll pull up a topic and we'll hopefully provide you with some new information that you can then use and go out and make your operations better because, as we say here on the chat, food safety is not a point of competition. We're all in this together. So with that, one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is put where in the world you're at. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, where the snow is coming. They're saying it's going to be starting here tonight. And I am joined by the lovely Cori Muse of Muse Food Safety Solutions down in hot Texas. So good morning, Cori.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm wearing a blazer, but really I'm wearing a t-shirt.
Yeah, it's funny because this is my live stream shirt. I wear this every time, but yeah, it says like pull this out of the closet. And it's funny because my wife hates this shirt. She's like, "Oh, wear that shirt." I'm like, what? This is my chat shirt. What are you talking about? And let's see. So with that, everybody come, join us here and let us know where you're at in the world. And this one really, I think for today's chat, Cori, it's a worldwide chat, right? Because this impacts everybody from what we're talking about. But before we dive in, everybody, please join us for a sip of your favorite beverage. Cheers.
Cheers.
Tim in lovely Nashville. I'm sure you're enjoying that much more than Minnesota, although Minnesota's had a very, very mild winter so far from what Cara and Jill are saying up there. So hopefully we're not punished here later in the year for the mild winter because it's been pretty mild for too.
About Cara Mickelson that you have on your show. I'm just curious if she's related to Bill Mickelson, who is my commercial landlord in Wisconsin. I don't know. The name's the same. They're up north. I don't know. I've always wondered when I see her name, I'm like, I wonder if she's related to Bill at all. He's a big developer.
Yeah, we'll have to. Well, it's funny because, brief segue on that. So Armentrout, right? Not exactly a common name. We're all related in one way or another. And my family's from Iowa. But originally in the 1700s, the family came from Germany. It was Armentrout. And a lady came across with her 4 children. And then it kind of went from there. So if you're in Virginia, and so when I was with White Wave, we have a plant in Mount Crawford, Virginia, and you open up the phone book and there's oodles of Armentrout, which is really weird. The only other Armentrout I've ever seen like on TV is on Breaking Bad. Mike, kind of the guy he used to be on a cop show. His character's last name was Armentrout or something like that. So it was like, that's claim to fame there. But it's a last name that is when you're a kid. We were kind of talking about kids in school earlier before we got on. It's kind of one of those names that just lends itself to nicknames. So I had my fair share. When I was a kid, my nickname was Fish.
Fish.
Yep. And that's a very fortuitous segue into our topic, which is food fraud. Right? And so part of this, Cori, I think a lot of times people kind of get these different categories: food fraud, food security, food defense, all these type of things confused. So what is, I guess that's a great place to start, is kind of define our terms. How do you define food fraud?
Yeah, because even as an auditor, you'll see this when you go through the different sections that you're talking about and you ask for a risk assessment or a vulnerability assessment, and it's all the same. And they're like, here it is. And it's their it's usually the food defense assessment. So what is the difference? I would say defense is more defending your property, defending against intentional outside sources messing with the food. Food fraud, I think, could go one of two ways. It could be your supplier is completely deceiving you and you really have no knowledge of that, or maybe you're in cahoots with your supplier, but it's a very focused agenda to change either the composition of the food or what you believe the food to be. That would be kind of my brief rundown of it.
No, I agree. I think those are great definitions. And a lot of times with food fraud, you'll hear another term, economically motivated adulteration, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going after this, right? They want the money. So they're trying to figure out ways to trick us and sell us something that isn't really what it is. Biosecurity, food defense, these type of things. You have somebody who's actively trying to hurt you in some way, and they don't really necessarily care about the money. So like a disgruntled worker, I'm going to get back at my SOB boss or things like this. And they're kind of related in some ways because they can overlap. If the food fraud then goes into an issue where you could potentially have a security issue, then those two things overlap. But it doesn't really happen all that often, really. While I was doing some research on this as well, here's a scary statistic on this, Cori, is it's estimated worldwide 1% of the food supply is fraudulent. Isn't that crazy? $40 billion a year in fraud. And so if you're a member of the mafia, if you're a criminal, that's a $40 billion, right? That's a very tempting chunk to go after and fool people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more common than it should be, obviously.
Yeah. And we just don't know, right? We just, as consumers in the marketplace, we just go to the grocery store and we trust what's on the shelf really is what it says it is. And if you go on a big shopping spree and you have 100 items in your shopping basket, one of those things in there may be fraudulent.
Yeah, for sure.
Ugh, yeah. Scary. So there's different types of fraud as well. So kind of the agenda for today is awareness, right? Because part of this then, and the takeaway for this for everybody is to go back and look at your supply chain, meet with your procurement group, and kind of make sure that you're addressing these things. I mean, there's a reason why supply chain is a preventive control, right? When FDA put together FSMA, they're like, okay, what are the super duper important things that everybody needs to have correct, right? So allergen, sanitation, supply chain, recall, these type of things. And right, supply chain and your supplier programs is right at the top of the list, for sure. There's Cara. So maybe she didn't hear the question. So where was your relative, Cori?
No, it's actually my landlord in McQuon, Wisconsin, Bill Mickelson. He's a builder. And I was just wondering if they were related because I see they're both up north, and I thought maybe they're related.
Yeah. So good morning, Cara, and let us know. And good morning to everybody else as well. Carrie, nice to see you. Jim, welcome. Good to see you guys. So part of this then is we kind of wanted to go over the types of food fraud that are out there, some examples of that. Then again, what can you do about these type of things? So kind of the first category is adulteration. And so for me, adulteration, Cori, is kind of a big catch-all term. And so we talk about regulations and things like this quite a bit on the chat. And right, so adulteration is one of the two main things that FDA is looking at when they're considering whether or not you're compliant with regulations. And so with adulteration, essentially, it's something that says it's food that's not, or things of this nature. So it can be as simple as adding ingredients, right? So let's say, for example, you have a product and you accidentally put in a wrong ingredient. And it's not an allergen or things like this. It's just like, oops, we had a little bit of leftover from changeover on our products or things like this. Technically, that product's adulterated because there's something in that product that you said is there, but it's really not.
Yeah, for sure. Even bacteria. I mean, we talk about all of that condensation, anything in your facility that's contaminating the food and it's in there, it's not on the label. And ethically, it shouldn't be there, and legally.
Yeah, absolutely. And so other people are filing in here. Good morning, everybody. So Austin, always good to see Austin. Cara, got our answer back on the Mickelson, so not related. Lena, good to see. I haven't seen Lena in a long time, so really, really good to have you join the chat here today. Next category, of course, this is a huge one, is counterfeiting, right? And it's kind of like we all know the examples of going to outdoor markets, right? So you go to a flea market or things like this, and they're selling Gucci bags for $20, right? That's not real. And that's counterfeiting. Now in food, counterfeiting exists as well. So there are very sophisticated operations that are out there that will make fake food, right? They'll have the logo of the company on it, Nestle, whoever, and Nestle isn't even making it. It's this fraudulent company that's making this product.
Yeah, and they're really good at it, I might say. I mean, it really looks exactly the same, maybe tastes the same. Technology is increasing, so there's things that we don't even necessarily understand. We've got like 3D printing. We may have talked about this on the show once. I saw something where they were making fake eggs in China and filling them with some sort of weird foam. But when they broke them open, they really looked like eggs. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. But it just really, when you see it happening and then you really think about it, it's like, I don't have mass spectrometry at my home. I can't test everything that I open. But are we buying what we think we're buying?
Right. And yeah, that's kind of on the, how can you protect yourself against this side of things? And really from a consumer standpoint, other than common sense, right, and being a very observant on what you're buying and where you buy it from, right? We would never, there's those old jokes, right? You're walking down the street in New York City and the guy in the trench coat opens up his coat, right? And he's got the watches. You would never buy food from people like that. Why don't you take these things into consideration when you're doing these things? Mislabeling, right? So we talked a little bit about how this overlaps with like adulteration and things like this, but just mislabeling the product, in some ways that's done intentionally. So if they have, let's say a chocolate product and they're labeling it at a higher cocoa percentage when it's really not, right? That's mislabeling, and that technically is adulteration as well. And misbranding too, right?
I've been seeing that a lot with the recalls lately with the dietary supplements. It looks like the FDA is testing a lot of those supplements and coming back and saying, hey, the content does not meet what you say it meets, or it has other things in it that you say that it doesn't. Maybe it's a supplement, but it's got diclofenac or something that's a prescription drug in it.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking a little bit about this whole issue with mislabeling here a little bit before. And it's absolutely crazy. I mean, what people will do associated with this. So people who don't understand the regulations will make all these insane, crazy claims. And you'll see this on Amazon, right? Look up, different supplements and things of this nature. Buy this weird herb. It will cure cancer and make your vision as good as an eagle's or whatever else, right? And you're like, oh, really? And on Amazon, you have to be really careful there too, because they will have other companies then will put in fake reviews for those products and say, oh my God, I tried this and it's amazing. And I can't believe how well I see now. They're fake, all fake.
Oh, I know. I mean, that goes in with the consumer education too. And it's just really hard to get consumers to fathom that us nerds are trying to help them. We're not trying to kill the fun, but these are real issues and you should look out for them. And most consumers just think, no, it's such and such company and they would never hurt me.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times too, as a consumer, I will buy something like this on Amazon and then I hit, buy or whatever. And then you look at the shipping to see when it's like, we'll ship in 10 days from China. And you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Right. Yeah.
You got to look at where it's who you're buying from and who it's distributing. And if it's not distributed from Amazon, it is a crap shoot for sure.
Yeah, you're guessing, right? And so part of what I'll look for is things that are too good to be true. And this is kind of a theme with this as well, is if I'm looking at buying something, and we're talking generically, but this doubly applies for food, is if I go in there and I look at those ratings and it's a perfect 5-star and there's 125, it's like highly doubtful. I'll give suppliers, because a lot of times people are just, a pain in the butt. And if I'm up to a 5% 1-star, it's like, oh, okay, right. If it gets above that, it's like, all right, there probably is some legit stuff. But a lot of times when you read the 1-stars, it's like just somebody who doesn't know how to use it or is just stupid.
Exactly.
Like, okay. But I always, if it's a perfect 5-star, my warning bells go off.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the placebo effect and things like that, like people do a review, they get the product, that one day they're happy, and then they don't come back to do the follow-up review of, oh, by the way, this stuff gave me diarrhea, or, it wasn't really what I thought it was, or it seems it wasn't what I thought it was. There's a lot of counterfeiting on Amazon. There's been a lot of documentaries about how easy it is to get counterfeit product on Amazon.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a price to pay sometimes for that convenience, for sure. Tim brought up here as well, right? Allergen risk. Oh my goodness, right? There's a very famous case of spice. We'll talk about different types of categories of products, but we'll bring this one up now. Ground spices are riskier than whole spices. There was ground cumin coming from India, right? Another watch out, right? Where you need to be careful. And somebody got the bright idea in that supply chain that, okay, hey, look at all these. We have these peanut hulls that we can grind up and add in the spice and dilute it. And now our 50 pounds of spice is 75 pounds. Woohoo, making money. And they didn't even think about the allergen risk because they didn't even know, right? So now all of a sudden we had this big issue in the United States with adulterated cumin with peanut protein in it.
Right.
Tim said, well, we got a testimonial from Tim, so maybe I will buy these eye improvement products now. So his vision has improved. So, all right, I'll get some of that after the show. Substitution of ingredients, as we were talking about. Of course, the giant issue we all think of in food safety is melamine. Oh my goodness, right? And so for those who aren't familiar with this issue, is in China, they were making milk powders and things of this nature. And somebody figured out over there, melamine is a byproduct of chemical manufacturing. It's waste product, no good use for it, these type of things. But somebody figured out that if you put it in products with food with protein, so for example, milk powder or pet foods or things like this, and you do a protein test, it mimics the protein. So they're like, yes. And so they started putting melamine into these products to fake the protein results. What they didn't realize, or maybe they did, who knows, is that melamine then would cause kidney failure. And a lot of people got sick from that, infants, right? It was terrible. A lot of people lost their pets because of it, because the vet had no idea what was going on. It was a huge, huge issue.
Yeah, I remember that was a really big deal.
Yeah. Another one is concealment of defects. So there's different ways, people who know the tricks of the trade can do things to make the food look better than it is. So for example, if you're in the grocery store and you see this beautiful tuna steak and it's bright red and you're like, ooh, look at that, that's yummy. Well, is it really that fresh? Maybe, maybe not. There's different techniques that people can use to make food appear better than it really is.
Yes. And even I've seen in Latin America, I've seen them spray painting, eggplants and certain fruits so that they'll look more brilliant to sell. And who knows if that paint has lead in it or, the paint in itself is not good, but it could get a lot worse.
Yeah, I saw a video online of a third world market, and this guy had like these droopy looking plants and whatever else, and he threw in some water, threw some chemical in there, started bubbling around and doing some stuff, and he pulled them back out, and they were nice and crisp and looking. Whoa, what's going on there? Right? Other food too that is highly prized relative for size, for example. So there was a huge scandal with shrimp. So in the Southeast Asian suppliers of shrimp, they were injecting the shrimp with different types of chemicals or things of this nature to puff them up and make them look bigger than they really were. And so that for them, that's just like printing money, right? So now all of a sudden you've got these higher quality shrimp that are bigger. They're going to get more money for them and they weigh more. So cha-ching.
Yes, there's I think a lot of fraud that goes on in the seafood industry for sure.
Yeah.
Even where it came from, how it was grown, all that good stuff.
Yeah. And the other one is gray market. So what's gray market? Gray market is kind of that, and we've been talking about this with Amazon and things like this, are secondary markets which aren't necessarily legit. So for example, let's say criminals steal a load of meat and then they do stuff to it and then they sell it through their channels. There was a huge issue in Europe with horse meat. So horse meat was being sold as real meat, as cow meat or things like this.
Right.
And so the horse meat was coming from Eastern European markets and then being, falsely presented in England and things like this. And the only way they found this out was through DNA analysis.
Yes. Some of those retail chains here in the States do DNA testing for their beef. So that's reassuring for those particular chains.
Yep. So part of this, right? So those are kind of the general categories that we came up with. And guys, if there are other categories that we missed during the chat here so far, throw them in the comments and let us know. And if you have crazy stories on this too, throw those in there too, and let's talk about them, because I think a big piece of food fraud here, Cori, is awareness, right? So number one, as a consumer, we're all eating. And as manufacturers of food and people who help protect those food as consultants and things like this, we need to understand these risks and make sure that other people do. A big part of what we do in our roles is education. So we probably know more about this than, let's say, somebody working in procurement. Doesn't take a whole lot of time or effort to talk with them to make sure that when they're looking at getting new sources, that they understand these type of activities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So what are some of the big categories? And part of this is, and I think a good way to think about this, and this is kind of how I do it as well, is food fraud people aren't going to mess around with low value items, right? Where it's really difficult and they have to make a whole lot of it to get their money back. So, those things tend to be lower risk, commoditized products where it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They gravitate toward those things that are high value. So here's some on this list that I came up with, and this is a big one, and this is Canada watches this one really closely because this is their national identity, is maple syrup, right?
Yeah.
Because maple syrup is extremely expensive to manufacture, and anybody who goes out and buys pure maple syrup and you get this teeny little bottle, for $10 or whatever, understands just how expensive this stuff is. And as a result of that, through legitimate channels, we have, imitation maple syrup because, it's like, okay, well, we need to come up with a better alternative for this. So people know how to fake it. Or you could also use some of these tools that we were talking about earlier. So diluting it or taking real maple syrup and adding in the fake stuff and then selling it as good product, right? So again, right, that's mislabeling, misbranding on that.
Yeah.
Things in the market that are presented as something else that they aren't. And it's kind of funny how these things kind of become accepted. If you go out and you eat sushi or something like this, and you put the little green wasabi stuff on there, in the U.S., unless you're at a really high-end restaurant, that's not wasabi. That's mustard. That's Chinese mustard. That's made to look like wasabi. Real wasabi is a root, and it's very expensive to grow. And the flavor dies off really quickly. So if you're in a really super fancy restaurant, they will actually grind it and prepare it right when you eat it. And so it's interesting how that has evolved, and people call it wasabi and it's not.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in one here. Some people get mad at me when I say this, but I raise an eyebrow at Arby's Wagyu beef.
Oh.
I'm not buying it. Like, that's all I'm going to say is I'm really not buying it. Wagyu beef is very expensive. I've had real Wagyu beef, and I just don't believe that Arby's is serving Wagyu beef for $5-10 a burger.
No, yeah, it's funny. As I was preparing for the chat here, I was looking at that particular issue, and there's even rules around what you can call that. So if one of the parents, like if you have a couple cows and they have a baby, if one of the parents has a certain percentage of lineage for Wagyu, they can call it Wagyu. It's not 100%.
So there's a loophole we've got here.
Exactly. Isn't that interesting how that works? Let's see. I saw a comment here from Austin. Any updates on the cinnamon applesauce story? That's an interesting one, isn't it? So if people on the chat aren't familiar with that issue, most people are, is we have these applesauce products marketed to children that they have found high levels of lead contamination, potentially other things as well, and they're trying to track it back to find out what the heck happened to this. And there have been quite a lot of kids, and this continues to grow, who have been potentially implicated with this issue. It's huge. Was that a fraud issue? We don't know yet. But Frank Giannis on Twitter had posted, kind of a long commentary on this, saying, hey, no passing the buck on this, because the manufacturer is saying, hey, this came from our manufacturers and we didn't know. Well, shame on you. You should, right?
Should have done better due diligence. It's on you.
Yeah, and so as part of your hazard analysis, cinnamon is at risk for those type of things, right? It's also for pathogens and things of this nature. So it's really important to understand your supply chain. There was a company I was working with that was looking at buying cinnamon from a supplier, and I started talking with them, and they had no clue. I mean, they were just going out, harvesting it, grinding it up, and selling it. I'm like, well, how are you guys managing pathogens? What are you guys doing for lead and testing and stuff like that? They're like, well, we don't do any of that. Done, right? There was a reason why they were a cheap supplier, right? So you have to be super.
And I think all companies and procurement should really think about that. You get what you pay for, and cheap ingredients are cheap for a reason. And when you're in an industry like baby food or selling to elderly or immunocompromised, you need to buy quality, safe ingredients. Well, I say that you should always do that, but I know you guys aren't going to do that. I know you're a bunch of snakes. So please don't do it to the kids and the elderly and the people with cancer. Please just have one part of the industry where you're going to do the right thing, if nothing at all. That's all I ask.
No, that's a really good point. I think that's something that we need to emphasize as well, is in your food safety plans, and you and I have seen this time and time again, when you get to the part in the food safety plan, when you're talking about your intended consumer of these type of things, 9 times out of 10, it says general population. And if you're producing a product that are for those markets that you just talked about, you're not selling to the general population. And your food safety plan needs to address that increased risk for those vulnerable audiences.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people write their food safety plan generically on purpose, or maybe they don't know how to do it correctly. But as an auditor, I see a lot of really silly food safety plans.
Yep. And so another big one is another big product that's very expensive. And part of this is origin, right? And where a product is from. And this is a big one, is Parmesan cheese, right? Parma, Italy is Parmesan cheese. And real Parmesan cheese is very expensive, right? It needs to be aged, and you see these pictures, like I got, all the cheese down here on my background here, because I love cheese. If you need to make sure then, if you're buying that Parmesan cheese, it's really from that region. Other types of cheeses, right? And you get back and forth on these relative to these namings, right? So feta is supposed to come from Greece, right? All these different type of regional cheeses that have these type of names, and people will produce those cheeses, slap, a cheap cheese and put that name on it and increase the price.
Or send something that has an origin of one country to be packed in another so that it's labeled as such, and now we don't know that it came from China originally. Things like that can be maybe not fraud, but deception.
Well, and part of this too, right? Yeah. People who are attempting to deceive us are sneaky, right? They know that they're doing this, and they'll come up with methodologies to counteract what we know. So on that honey story, Cori, so everybody's been very wary of honey from China. So chloramphenicol in the contamination in the honey, because in China, they use that to keep the bees healthy. So they're giving the bees antibiotics to make sure that the bees are healthy and producing lots of honey. You also get, for example, and this is something, if people don't know this, you definitely need to know this, is never give honey to infants. Part of that is because of Clostridium, you may have a little bit of toxin in that honey, and that's very dangerous for babies because they have no defense against that. So China had this giant production of honey, but nobody would buy the honey because nobody trusted it. So what they started doing, and it took a while to figure this out because you had to look at the export numbers. Chinese companies would send Chinese honey to Vietnam. To your point, Cori, repack it as Vietnamese honey and then export it to the US. People started looking at the production numbers and say, hey, hold on a minute here. How are they making this honey? There's not enough farms and there's not enough bees in Vietnam to produce this level of honey. So they were able then to backtrack through that and figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sebastian has a good comment here. And definitely, guys, these are awesome comments. Please keep them coming. Sebastian says here, Costco is a great example of a retailer that demands high quality and safe goods for its members. Absolutely. And this gets back to that trust issue. And yeah, I'm a loyal Costco customer, as a lot of you probably know. And that's how I build up my level of trust is I know that Costco has good systems. And the chances, it's not zero, but the chances of having an issue are much less. So for example, I will use a multi-tiered approach on items that I know as a consumer are high risk. So olive oil, super high risk on olive oil, right? Just like that Parmesan cheese, a lot of times you'll get this oil, right? And so you have these different tiers within olive oil, right? You got cold press, first cold press, and all these type of different levels. And that first press, that's where the bucks are. And they will mislabel. They will cut it with different types of oils, whatever, right, to get that high dollar value. So what I'll do at Costco is, number one, we'll talk about this one too, is I'll buy the Kirkland brand olive oil, first press organic, right? So now I've got 3 different levels. I'm pretty confident that Costco is selling me with that oil is really what they're saying what it is. So thanks, Sebastian. Good comment.
Yeah.
Is it 100% foolproof? No.
No, but I mean, that brings up a good point that a lot of the grocery retailers have little to no supplier approval. And you see that with the recalls. And I don't know, I just see a lot of passing the buck. It's a chain and we're all responsible. So even if downstream it's someone else's fault, if I'm in that chain, I should ask myself after that event, what could I have done differently? What should I do differently in the future to prevent this? And not just, hey, it was their fault and we're gonna move on.
Exactly. And very tough being in quality assurance at retail. If you're working in that field and you're doing that, well, first off, hats off to you because you've got a really hard job. Think about all the products in a grocery store, thousands of products. There is no way. Right, you would have to have an army of people working in quality and food safety at a retailer to manage that. So to your point, Cori, they are relying on their supply chain to manage these type of risks. Another big area of risk, right? So olive oil, we talked about that one. Flavors and spices. So there was a big issue a number of years ago with vanilla. So we all know, right? You go to the grocery store and you buy pure vanilla. Well, is it pure? Very expensive. And most of the vanilla in the world comes from Madagascar, right? That big island off the coast of Southern Africa. And a giant tsunami came through and just decimated the vanilla crop. And the prices just shot through the roof. And so if you're a food manufacturer, you have to have this if this is an ingredient. So food fraudsters are very opportunistic and they'll see things like that and they'll go, ooh, I can make some quick money, right? So then they'll jump in and, start using imitation vanilla and things like this and creating these and then trying to sell that to suckers out there, right? Because if you're manufacturing and you can't find vanilla and you're going to be shutting down your plants because you can't make that vanilla ice cream, you're scrambling, right? And you're trying to find anything that you can. And that's a really bad position to be in because now the quality group is like, we don't know who these people are. We don't have any information here. And that pressure in an organization to get that product out the door can be overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to be super careful about that. And so within food safety, which is why it's extremely important for quality people to partner up with your procurement group and manage these things. And always look at it in two buckets is, okay, how do we control risk on our existing things that we buy and focusing on those high risk items, and then also working upstream and getting involved up front and making sure that the R&D teams, when they're creating new products, understand this as well. So if you can use ingredients that have already been vetted and trusted and coming from companies that you know, use them. Right? Don't go out there just because you went to a fancy food show and you see all these really super slick, cool new things and you want to try them out and come up with a new product. You got to be careful.
Yeah, you'll end up like Daily Harvest and sicken 400 people with your super fun, super cool new ingredient, and maybe you'll pay off some scientist to write a silly report and say all the people that got sick have some weird genetic disorder. I mean, but honestly, quality, food safety, however you want to call that department, and procurement should be best friends. I'm going to call out Frito-Lay because I'm not going to say anything bad, but R&D, food safety and quality are best friends with procurement. They do a lot of activities together. And I'd say the procurement there has more food safety knowledge than most of the food safety leadership that I've worked with in other small companies. The procurement team has more knowledge, I'll say it again, in food safety than the food safety professionals with degrees and certificates and all of that. And that's where you want your procurement team to be. You want to educate them. You want them to be your friend and work together to make sure that you're buying the right ingredients and that they understand, because sometimes they don't understand.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, so, kind of a little segue here, but I think it's important is people follow incentives. And is there any rule that says in your company that you can't put incentives in the procurement group that say part of what you will be evaluated on is, price and all the normal things that procurement's evaluated on, but why not have something in there that says, if a recall is triggered because of a material we buy that you approved, that's going to be considered in your bonus or your review for next year.
Yes. And that does go on at some companies, at the more robust ones that I was mentioning.
Yeah, it's that old saying, right? What gets measured gets managed. So make sure that you're doing that. I have a question here from Cori. Thank you for the question. Let's see here what we got. So is there a consumer education piece of this when there appears to be so little tolerance for higher food processes? Oh, that's a good point. There's so much pressure for cutting costs, right? Companies right now are under the gun. And you see politicians that are out there saying, these food companies are taking advantage of the consumers with these high prices and they need to bring their prices back down and stuff like that. Well, how do you do that, right? So we talked, about shrinkflation, where companies will redesign their products, right, to make them smaller and smaller at the same price, which really ticks people off. Or you find cheaper ingredients. And all of a sudden now, Cori, that's a really good point. That risk meter, right, that's going up. It's going up. Right. So now you're dealing with new suppliers. You don't know who they are. You may not know where it comes from. And that pressure is immense.
It's so complex because, the cheaper ingredients, the lower quality, talking about supplements like bioavailability, there's all of these little things, little nuances that go together to make the finished product. And she's right. There's not a good place for consumers to go to educate themselves. And you and I talked about this on another food safety chat. You have social media and TikTok, and you have these influencers that are like, oh, I'm on the raw chicken diet. And it's just it's so stupid. We're in idiocracy. I can't take it. I see shit like that. And I'm just like, I give up. I don't even know why I'm doing this, honestly. But how do you counter that new age mentality of it's cool to be stupid and I'm a tough guy if I eat raw chicken and I don't die, or I eat leftover rice on the counter for a week and I don't be serious. And then you have people like us that are trying to educate how do we bring the two together? Because I saw Felix say there's so much that goes into frauding people. How do we put that energy into fixing the problem? I think part of the problem is that the energy being put into the fraud is by people that I call clown snakes, and they have no ethics, and we're not going to change them. So how do we fix this? We can only do so much on our end as professionals and as companies, but it also extends to the bad players. What do we do about the bad players?
Yeah, I mean, and so part of this, right, is, you can't fix stupid, right? We've all heard that saying before. And education of the consumer, that's tough, right? Because as food manufacturers, we're in a difficult spot. Regulators will come back to us and say, you cannot blame your food safety failures on the consumer, right? But if the consumer's being a dumbass, okay, you leave your meat out on the counter for a few days and then you get sick, okay, you're stupid, right? But you can't do that. Now, there are risks that people see that we're aware of. So, for example, cookie dough, right? Everybody eats raw cookie dough. Is that risky? Yeah, it is. And so food companies have got caught in that before, where it's like, okay, well, you had E. coli in your cookie dough and people ate it. And the food company says, well, why are they eating raw cookie dough? You need to bake it, and then that takes care of risk. And the FDA is like, nope. You cannot sell adulterated products. So even though the consumer is behaving in a way that they shouldn't, you still are responsible.
Yes, and I like how some of them fix that by just making it ready to eat or ready to bake. Pillsbury did that, so they're in my drawer all the time, because I am guilty of eating cookie dough. I am. Mm-hmm. I can't help myself. It tastes really good.
Well, and part of it is informed risk, right? We know.
Yeah, there you
go. And so we kind of had that advantage in that, we're healthy adults. We understand the risk. And so it's like, okay. And if I ate some raw cookie dough or I drank a protein shake with a raw egg in it or whatever, I understand that risk. If I get sick, I'm going to say, okay, that's my own.
Yeah, I'm not suing anybody. I'm just going to be like in the bathroom going, you knew better.
Felix asked an interesting question here. Has anyone actually ever met a food fraudster? With some instances, you think they'd be everywhere, right? I haven't met any personally, right? But there are examples out there on the internet. I was trying to find this to prepare for this, and I couldn't find it, which I was like, bummer. But there was an issue with a juice manufacturer, and they were fraudulently adding in high fructose corn syrup in, right? So they were cutting the product with this, adulterating it to make it cheaper. And FDA went in with cameras. They found out about this, and this juice plant had a secret hidden room. And it was fancy, right? So in the dead of night, these trucks would come in and deliver this syrup, and they would pump it into these secret tanks in this secret room, and then they would bleed it into the product. So they had this secret door that they opened in the silo room, and they went in there, and it was just like, wow, right? And so they were showing these guys get arrested and carted out of there. So for me, Felix, that's kind of the closest example, right, where you're actually seeing them on camera, of these fraudsters. Let's see, another good one, right? So we kind of talked about spices. It's always, number one, spices have a variety of different risks and a very long, complicated supply chain. And whole spices, as a general rule, are safer than ground spices. So whole black pepper is safer than ground pepper. Why? Because our cumin example, right? They can add stuff into that you don't know is there. They're cutting that product. High priced items, right? So here's a good one. Coffee, right? Here is our single sourced Ethiopian coffee picked on the sides of this one particular mountain by this family of 10 people, and it's being sent directly to you. Really? Wow, that's pretty amazing. How are you getting away with that? And they're charging incredible amounts of money for that. So anytime you have high value, high prestige type items, wine. Oh my goodness, wine. And certain countries have a bad reputation for fraud in the wine industry. Italy. Italy has a bad reputation. I like wine, and I avoid Italian wines, especially when you get to the high-end Italian wines, right? So this super Tuscan for $60 a bottle, is it real? I don't know.
Yeah. Hard to say. So, I mean, and that kind of says too, like about deceptive marketing and the understanding of the consumer. So we may not be diluting the olive oil, but like, let's say some of the lab grown meat and they show the big commercials with the giant reactors, right? They're not making the meat in those giant reactors. It's not possible. They're making them in little tiny test tubes by hand. And it's really gross. It's really grotesque. They don't show it in any of the marketing because no one would want to eat it if they saw it. So my question is that fraud? And to me, I think it is. If I think that you are brewing my beer in giant vats at Miller, you know, and I find out you're doing it in your basement with rusty equipment, and that may not be like an apple to apple comparison, but I paid for it to be manufactured in that facility with the QMS and the experts and XYZ and the big show, like at Jurassic Park that you put us in and you showed us the video and we're like, oh, this is cool. This is great. And then I sit down to eat and I eat it and I find out later that's not what it was, or it's not how it was made. To me, I still think that's fraud. And I need to send you, I'll put it in the comments when we're done. There's this TikTok, Instagram reel from some cooking show where it was like you name 3 ingredients and somebody cooks a meal and then you feed it to everybody and you say, which ingredient do you think I used? And the guy, I'm going to get it wrong, but he named, let's just say he said cat hair. He said something else egregious, I don't know, anchovies. And then he said human flesh. And all of a sudden, everyone that ate was like, you could tell they were sickened, but they were looking at each other going, no, this can't be right. This, you know what, this can't be right. And the thing that kind of cracked me up is that they all looked at each other and they said, oh no, it's cool. We cleared it with legal. And it turns out it was human flesh. And I mean, I laughed. I made a comment like, oh, I've worked at places like that before. Like that phrase, we cleared it with legal. I don't know how they cleared it with legal, but I would be so mad if I entered into something like that and they fed me human flesh. So, you know what I mean? Like deceit is fraud in my mind as well. Just deceiving somebody about what it is, how it got there. I don't want to get too derailed. I have even grosser stories than that I've seen where they make products and they tell you that it was made from body parts that are gross. We'll just say that. But they've already put it on their face. There's like one with Steve Harvey. He puts this cream on his face and then they tell him it was made from a body part. And he's just like, why didn't you tell me that? And freaks out. Well, later you find out it's not actually directly that body part. You know, there's some other things going on, but the way you choose your words and the way you choose to illustrate something can be powerful and it can change the meaning of what it is.
Oh, absolutely. So Kimberly had a good one here, and this is another one that we haven't talked about yet, is fish, right? So sushi restaurants, again, high end, right? This is the premium tuna belly cut, you know, from these type of things flown in from Japan just for you. Misrepresenting food is a huge issue, right? So it used to be like in retailers, crab sticks, right? They would have fake crab meat, and then they actually changed the name because it was so prevalent, and they got forced into no, this is crab, KRAB, right? It's not. It's like there was, you know. So everybody understands now, hopefully, that that's not really crab meat. It's fish that's been manipulated and pressed around to make it look and taste like crab meat, but it ain't that, right? So again, with trust, you have to trust that sushi restaurant that you're going to, that's high end and these type of things, that they're actually doing what they do. And same at retail. Sebastian had an interesting question here. Do you think that private products that get recalled should be forced to name the actual manufacturer? Wow, that's interesting, right? Because they don't do that, right? So if you've got ABC Food Company and they're using a co-manufacturer to produce that product, and that's where the real problem is, it's the recall is under that company name, not the co-man's name. There would be definite advantages to that, because if I'm a food manufacturer and I'm considering using that co-manufacturer and they're tied up in a recall, I want to know that.
Yeah, I say yes, because I know a lot of companies that use co-packers to assert legal consequences, assert brand tarnish. If you don't know that that co-packer is making a certain product for a major brand and that's their weak product, but they make a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
That's a little deceptive. And if that company's having multiple recalls, I would want to know, because I think it would be reflective of their overall systems.
Yep. And so another example, and we'll get into kind of the mitigation piece of it here because we're running out of time, is anytime there's a new market that kind of pops up, you need to be extra careful. So for example, here in Colorado and in the US, right, marijuana, right? So now all of a sudden, all these people rush into this market to make money. Yes. What do they actually know about food protection, food safety, standard of identity? Probably very little, right? It's like your beer example, Cori. I mean, so you may be, I'm gonna get into the craft brewing market and make a lot of money making these single brew type. Do they really understand all the elements that they need to? Probably not. Cannabis experts, yeah. So on the mitigation side of this, right, how can you protect yourself, right? We've been talking that a lot here, and your company. And number one is you have to know your suppliers. You have to, and build relationships with them so that you understand where it is they get their products and things like this. Those relationships are gold. Anytime somebody comes in new that you don't know, you have to assume that there's problems, and you have to go out there and root those things out. You have to evaluate that. Part of the conversation I've had with procurement in the past is, oh, hey, you're looking at this new supplier. Oh, no, it's okay. We're getting pre-shipment samples. Well, how in the hell do you know that pre-shipment sample is the same stuff that's showing up your plant?
Exactly.
You don't. Austin, yeah. Organic, right? We didn't talk about organic. That was on the list too, right? Organic is a premium product, right? So if you're buying organic materials, you gotta be extra careful there too. Now, with organic, you have inspectors and stuff like that, but have they really been inspected? There are issues like with GFSI certifications and organic and things like that, fraudulent certificates, right? It's all organic and good.
It doesn't mean safe either.
No.
I mean, absolutely. And it doesn't mean no pesticides. Guys, it doesn't mean it's free of pesticides. It's just using approved pesticides. I don't know how many family members I have that say, I buy organic because there's no pesticides, and hate to burst their bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're talking about here, we've been going through these kind of really good examples on the concrete level. Be aware of high-risk ingredients. So you need to keep a close eye on the market. And this goes back to what you were talking about, Cori, is you need to be married at the hip with procurement, right? So that you know what they're doing, they know what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. Procurement is incredibly valuable in this process. They have market insights and they know people and these stuff that you'll never know, right? And you need to rely on them for helping on these things.
And take them with you when you go on audits. Like, there's nothing better than having an angry purchasing person with you because you've disqualified a supplier, than taking them to one of these horrible places and them seeing. You wouldn't believe the people I've been like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, they respected me after that because they started to see they themselves don't find that acceptable. So there's a lot of detachment when you don't go physically look at these suppliers.
Yeah. I had a conversation one time with a supplier that we were looking at purchasing from, and they were in the Philippines and they had sent over their food safety plan. I looked at it and had questions. And so I called and started talking with this guy. And after about 5 minutes, he said, Hey, Bryan, I'm going to be honest with you. I just put this together with a local university student because I want to sell in the US market. I don't have any answers for you. Wow. Right. If you just accept that paperwork at face value, you would never have found that out.
FSVP is scary right now because a lot of it is just paperwork, like you're saying. And a lot of the calls we get, watch the imported food. And if you're a food manufacturer, do your FSVP and watch that food that's coming in like a hawk, because they've been running wild all these years and we're just now cracking down on them. And the things I see are egregious.
Yeah. Number one category for FDA for issuing nonconformances, foreign supplier verification. Don't forget to check the import regs, right?
Yes.
So not the regs, but the import laws of people, who get detained or things like this, or are turned away from bringing product into the U.S. You need to know that. Country of origin, right? So we're talking about that piece of it now. Is there's more fraud in certain countries than others. So if you're buying milk products from India, whoa, you got to be super, super careful, right? And there's lots of issues in India with fraud associated with milk, and you need to understand that. We talked about honey from China. There's certain markets out there in the world you have to be super careful with, and that scream and deal may not really be a deal. There's certain markets that you have to deal with. So a lot of the mineral supplements or vitamins and things like this are manufactured in China now. You may not have other options. So you need to put together a plan on how you're going to make sure that what you're getting is actually what it says. Opportunity. So what do I mean by opportunity? Is how many links are in that supply chain? So if you have to go from the grower to a distributor to a forwarder to a warehouse to and there's 10 different steps in between, that means all those opportunities, someone can go in there and mess with that. So you need to understand that.
And sometimes it's designed that way, especially when you're dealing with foreign suppliers. You really, really have to be careful, because even in doing all your due diligence, mistakes are made and things happen. I have lots of stories.
Oh, yeah. You have to understand as well. So a lot of companies, big and small, have to deal with brokers and distributors that represent these products. You need to understand that supply chain. And if they're located in London and you think that's coming from London and they're not exactly volunteering it, but actually the material they're purchasing comes from another country, you need to know that. And you need to understand the exact plant that product is manufactured at. You can't approve a broker or distributor. You have to approve the manufacturing facility. And if that broker or distributor balks and doesn't want to share that information with you, you got a problem. And a lot of times too, distributors or brokers don't understand this, and they'll switch around suppliers because, I can buy this cheaper from this other guy. And no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Like what we're talking about right here, and this is where I think the chat is super valuable as well. So hopefully we've got some gears going in your heads, is keep up on these issues, right? We are dealing with an active adversary who is trying to fool us, right? Because that's how they make their money. Criminals are never going to go away, right? And they're actively out there trying to find the next way to hoodwink us. So we have to be up on this as well. It's kind of like what Felix is saying here as well. Is like, okay, catch me if you can, right? And in some cultures around the world, they view these issues differently. Is that, okay, if I can fool you and I get away with it, that's your fault. That's not my fault.
Yes.
You need to understand that. So know who you're dealing with. And so a big piece on this, right, is that saying, I think this goes back to President Reagan with Gorbachev, is trust but verify, right? You can have a good supply chain, but you need to make sure that what they're saying is actually true. Because think of this from the other side. When FDA or whatever regulatory agency shows up, you need to prove to them, right? Preventive control, supply chain preventive control. You need to prove to them everything that we're talking about here today. And laws around the world are getting stricter and stricter around this. We spoke recently with Stephanie over in Germany about some new laws over there relative to this. So it's being cracked down on. You need to understand this.
Definitely.
So part of this, right, and this is where I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with food fraud. This is kind of a good way to kind of summarize our conversation here today, Cori, is you can't test for everything, right? You'll go bankrupt if you do that.
Oh, yeah.
So you need to put together a strategic plan, working with, again, your procurement group, other people in the supply chain who are involved in this process, to put together a rational program for this. And if you have a new supplier that you need to use and you're not very familiar with them, you need to be much more aggressive in verification to make sure that these guys are sending what you're supposed to be sending to you. And after you develop that trust with them, then you can start dialing that back down. But pretty much if you assume that what's coming into your plants, and again, 1% worldwide is fraud, $40 billion, the chances of something coming into your plant, pretty good. So you need to be active around this and making sure that you're dealing with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speak up.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Let other people know what you're finding out there, right? So we need to be active on our side to say, hey, heads up, guys. There's an uptick in fraud on these type of areas, right? And so John Spink up at Michigan State, right? He deals a lot with food fraud. Dial in, plug into what's going on out there relative to these type of things. You have to constantly keep up on this.
Yeah, for sure. Because like you say, it's not a secret. So attend things like these, be collaborative, pay attention in the industry, and share information. Don't feel like I have a secret. You don't have a secret. We all know.
Absolutely. So great. So with that, unfortunately, guys, we're out of time already. So let's close out the chat. So first off, fantastic comments, everybody. Thank you. I love it when we get this type of interaction. And I really appreciate you taking the time. An hour out of your busy week is a lot. So we really appreciate you joining us here today for the chat. And with that, thank you, Cori, as well. Always great sharing your expertise. We'll have with this the closing out of our chat for today. And we will be back here next week, of course, at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, or wherever you may be in the world. And we live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. So please join us for the next chat next week. In the meantime, you did a great job this week. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you back here next week. So thanks, everyone, and thanks, Cori. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.